You are standing in your garden with a spray bottle in your hand. The leaves are chewed, the aphids are back, and that little trigger you keep pulling has quietly cost you $100 this year already. Put it down, because there is one thing you can do this weekend, one simple thing that takes care of 90% of your pest troubles for the whole rest of the season. Not a spray, not a powder, not a single thing from the shelf at the big store. We have done it this way for generations. My people never bought a bottle of bug killer in our lives, and our gardens fed whole families through long Pennsylvania winters. Here is the part nobody at that store wants to say out loud. There is a whole industry that makes its money off you losing this fight every single year. If you solved it for good, they would sell you nothing. So they have no reason to tell you what my grandfather knew before I could walk. Stay with me. Right around the middle of this, I am going to show you exactly how to stop an aphid takeover cold for less than the price of a cup of coffee, the same way my community has done it on the same ground for over 100 years. Before we go further, do me one small favor. Drop your state or your growing zone down in the comments. I want to see where you are gardening from, because the pests you fight in Georgia are not the ones I fight up here, and I read every one of them. I still remember being maybe 8 years old, out in the kitchen garden behind our farmhouse in Lancaster County, and my grandfather kneeling down in the dirt beside a row of cabbages that were full of holes. I thought for sure we would lose them. He did not reach for anything. He just pointed to a little wasp, no bigger than a grain of rice, working its way across a leaf, and he said, "That one there is on our side. Leave it be." I did not understand it then. I understand it now. And by the end of this, you will too. Let me start with the thing that took me the longest to accept, because it goes against everything the modern world will tell you. The more you spray, the worse your pests get. I know how that sounds. You see a bug, you kill the bug, the problem should get smaller. That is common sense. But it is exactly backward, and there is a plain reason why, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. When you spray a broad bug killer across your garden, you do not just kill the pest. You kill everything with 6 legs out there. The trouble is, the bad bugs and the good bugs do not come back at the same speed. Not even close. Think about an aphid. A single aphid can give birth to live young without even mating, and those young are born already pregnant. One aphid becomes hundreds in about a week. They are built to explode in numbers fast. That is their whole way of surviving in this world. Now think about a ladybug, or one of those little wasps my grandfather pointed to. They lay eggs, those eggs hatch, the young have to grow, and it takes weeks before there is a new generation hunting. They are slow and steady. They are the fox, and the aphid is the rabbit. So when you spray and wipe the slate clean, guess who floods back into your garden first? The pest. It comes roaring back with nothing left to stop it, because you just killed every predator that was holding the line. Your garden becomes a buffet with no guests to eat the food. And 2 weeks later, you are staring at a worse infestation than you started with, reaching for that bottle again. That is not an accident. The outside world even has a name for it. They call it the pesticide treadmill. You spray, the pests rebound harder, so you spray more, and you are running and never getting anywhere but poorer. The scientists at land-grant universities have measured this exact thing. Study after study out of places like the University of California found that fields sprayed with broad insecticides had pest outbreaks flare back up worse than fields left alone, because the natural enemies took far longer to recover than the pests did. They gave it that fancy name, pest resurgence. My grandfather just called it stirring the pot. Same thing. And here is the cost of not knowing this. The average homeowner who fights bugs with sprays is not spending $20 a year. Between the bottles, the concentrates, the little hose attachments, the fancy organic ones that cost even more, folks are spending well over $100 every single season, year after year, and their pest problem is no better in year 5 than it was in year 1. That is the treadmill. That is the whole business model. So if spraying makes it worse, what did my people do instead? Because we grew food on this land for generations without any of it. That is where the real secret begins, and it is the opposite of killing. Instead of killing the bad bugs yourself, you hire someone to do it for you. And that someone works for free, never takes a day off, and never sends you a bill. Let me tell you what one of these little workers can really do, because when I first learned the numbers, I could hardly believe them. Take the common ladybug. Everybody knows what a ladybug looks like, but most folks have never seen its child, and the child is the real hunter. The larva looks like a tiny black and orange alligator crawling across your leaves. People see it and think it is a pest and squash it. That is a tragedy, because that one little alligator will eat around 400 aphids before it grows up. The adult ladybug it becomes will eat around 50 aphids a day for the rest of its life. One female over her lifetime clears out several thousand. Now think about the green lacewing. Pretty little thing, pale green with lace wings, harmless looking. Its larva has earned the nickname the aphid lion, and it earned it honestly. A single lacewing larva can eat 200 aphids in a week. It does not just eat aphids either. It goes after mites, thrips, whitefly, small caterpillars, insect eggs, mealybugs. It is not picky, it is hungry. And then there is the one my grandfather pointed to, that tiny wasp no bigger than a grain of rice. It does not sting you, it cannot. It is a parasitic wasp, and what it does to an aphid is straight out of an old story. It lays a single egg inside a living aphid. The egg hatches inside, and the young wasp eats the aphid from the inside out, and the aphid swells up into a hard little brown shell we call a mummy. One female wasp can do that to a few hundred aphids in her short life. When you see those little tan, bloated aphids stuck to your plants, do not panic. That is not the enemy winning, that is your army working. Here is the whole picture. For every single pest in your garden, nature already made something that wants to eat it. The balance is already built in. It was built in long before any of us got here. The problem was never that you did not have enough killer. The problem is you kept killing the killers. So why does everybody's garden not just fix itself? Why do these good bugs not simply show up and stay? That right there is the question that separates the folks who fight pests every year from the folks like my community who barely think about them anymore. And the answer is so simple it almost made me laugh when my father finally spelled it out for me. The good bugs will come, but they will not stay unless you give them a reason to. And most gardens, tidy as they are, give them no reason at all. Here is the thing nobody tells you about a ladybug or a lacewing or that little wasp. They only eat pests when they are young, when they are those hungry larvae. But the grown-up adult, the one that lays all those eggs, does not live on aphids. The adults live mostly on nectar and pollen. They need flowers. Not big showy flowers either. They need tiny, small, shallow flowers, because these are small insects with short little mouth parts, and they cannot drink from a deep trumpet-shaped bloom any more than you could drink soup through a coffee stirrer. So picture what happens in a normal garden. A hungry ladybug flies over, lays her eggs on your aphids, the babies eat and grow up, and then those new adults look around for a flower to feed on, find nothing but vegetable leaves and mulch, and they fly off to the neighbor's yard to find dinner. You raised them. You fed the whole first batch on your pests, and then you lost the very generation that would have stayed and hunted for you all summer. The fix costs almost nothing. This is the part I promised you back at the start. The aphid takeover you can stop for less than a cup of coffee. A single packet of sweet alyssum seed costs about $1.50, sometimes less. It is that low white carpet of tiny flowers you have seen spilling over the edge of flower beds, smelling faintly of honey. To you, it is a pretty little thing. To a hoverfly, it is a full dinner table that never runs empty. And the hoverfly is the one I want you to really hear about, because this is where the outside world's own scientists finally caught up to what my people always did. A hoverfly looks like a small bee or a little yellow jacket, but it cannot sting you. It just hovers, dead still in the air, then darts. The adult drinks nectar. Its larva, though, is a tiny blind maggot that crawls along your leaves and eats aphids by the hundreds. One hoverfly larva can eat right around 400 aphids as it grows. Out in Salinas, California, the government's own agricultural research folks ran the test on organic lettuce fields. They planted rows of sweet alyssum right in among the crop. The alyssum flowers pulled in clouds of hoverflies, the hoverflies laid their eggs, and the larvae cleaned the aphids off the lettuce so thoroughly that the growers could sell it. They found that giving up just a small share of the field to alyssum flowers controlled the aphids across the whole planting. No spray, just a $1 flower doing the work. Now think about that, $1 billion chemical business, and the answer that beat it in a real field trial was a packet of seed that cost less than the change in your pocket. That is not folklore. That is a measured result. It just happens to be the exact same thing my grandmother did when she edged her vegetable rows with sweet alyssum and let the dill and the cilantro go to flower on purpose. She was not being fussy about looks. She was feeding her workers. Here is how you do it, plain and simple. Get sweet alyssum and get a few plants from the carrot and parsley family, because their flat little flower clusters are the very best feeding stations there are. That means dill, fennel, cilantro, parsley, caraway. When your cilantro bolts and shoots up those white lacy flower heads in the heat, most folks yank it out because it stopped making leaves. Do not let it flower. That flower head is feeding more little wasps and hoverflies than any bottle ever could. Add in some yarrow, some chamomile, a bit of buckwheat which flowers in just a few weeks from seed, and you have built a diner that stays open all season. Scatter these among your vegetables and along the edges. You want a little something in bloom from spring all the way to frost, so there is never a hungry gap where your workers pack up and leave. That is the whole trick. Never let the table go empty. But maybe you are sitting there thinking, that is fine for someone starting a garden from scratch. My beds are already full. My yard has been the same for 20 years. I am not tearing it all up to plant flowers for bugs. I hear you. And I want to talk to you especially because you are the one this helps the most, and you do not have to tear up a single thing. Your established garden is already a better home for these workers than any brand new plot could ever be. You just have not been letting it act like one. So here is what you can do this very weekend with nothing but what you already own. Now, I can only fit so much of this into one video, and the truth is, I sat down and wrote all of it out proper, because folks kept asking me the same questions in the comments year after year. 3 books, written by my own hand, over 328 pages of the plain way we have always done it here in Lancaster County. Not just which good bugs to keep, but killing the nest instead of the ant, you see, with borax and vinegar and baking soda already sitting under your sink. Feeding tomatoes and peppers and roses so they actually produce with the cutoff date for stopping nitrogen laid out zone by zone. Picking ripe produce so you quit throwing food out on Friday, making eggs last weeks, and setting a fence post that outlives you. Everything I could not squeeze into 15 minutes, measured and tested, so you understand it once and are done paying for it forever. If that is the kind of knowing you want in your hands, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment. The books are waiting. Now let me get back to the part folks always ask about next. First, stop being so tidy in one small corner. Pick a spot along a fence or behind the shed, someplace out of the way, and just stop mowing it and stop pulling it. Let it grow a little rough. That messy corner becomes the safe house where your beneficial bugs hide from weather and wind and raise their young. In my community, we always kept the edges of a plot a little wild on purpose. The English call it messy. We called it sensible. Second, this one takes 10 minutes. Go find whatever is already blooming or about to bloom that you were planning to pull. That bolted lettuce, the broccoli that flowered on you, the herbs going to seed. Leave them standing. Every one of those is a feeding station you already grew and were about to throw in the compost. You paid for them once. Do not waste the second gift they are trying to give you. Third, and this is the one folks fight me on the hardest, leave your aphids alone for 2 weeks. I mean it. If you wipe out every last aphid the moment you see one, you have just starved every ladybug and lacewing and wasp before they could arrive. They need to smell prey to come. A small number of pests is not a failure. It is the bait that brings your whole free workforce to your yard. My father used to say you have to leave a little supper out if you want the help to show up. A garden with 0 pests and 0 predators is a garden 1 bug away from disaster. A garden with a few pests and a strong crew of hunters takes care of itself. Fourth, take a look at what you are already growing and just let a few plants of it flower. If you grow carrots, leave 2 or 3 in the ground into their second season and let them send up those big lacy flower heads. Same with any onion or leek. Those round flower balls are covered in tiny blooms that feed the smallest wasps beautifully. You do not add anything. You just hold back your hand and let a few plants finish what they started. None of that costs a dime. None of it needs a single tool you do not have. And any one of those 4 will put more hunters in your garden by next month than a whole shelf of product ever would. Now, once you have done that, you have solved the food problem. Your workers have something to eat, but there is a second thing they need that almost nobody thinks about. And when I tell people this one, I watch their faces change, because it is so obvious once you hear it and so easy to miss. They need to drink. Every one of these little hunters, the ladybug, the lacewing, the wasp, the hoverfly, and every songbird that eats caterpillars by the beakful, they all need water. Not a lot, but they need it close by. And here is the cruel little trap. A hot, dry spell in July is exactly when your aphids and your spider mites go wild, because dry, stressed plants are their favorite food. But that same heat is when your beneficial bugs are dying of thirst and leaving to find water somewhere else. So, the moment you need your army the most is the very moment they abandon the field. Not because there is no food, because there is nothing to drink. The fix is almost too simple. Take a shallow dish, a plant saucer, an old pie tin, the lid off something, fill it with small stones or pebbles or a few marbles, and then add water until it comes about halfway up the stones. The stones matter. A small insect cannot land on open water without drowning. It needs a dry rock to stand on while it drinks, like stepping stones across a creek. My grandmother kept a chipped clay saucer of water with pebbles in it at the corner of her garden her whole life. I thought it was for the birds. It was for everyone. Set 2 or 3 of these around the garden, low, near your plants, in a little shade, top them off every couple of days. That is it. You have just given your entire free workforce a reason to stay through the hottest, hardest part of the year, the exact stretch when most gardens fall apart. It costs nothing. And it does something no spray on earth can do. It keeps your help from quitting. Now, think about how much of this the outside world has quietly buried. Flowers you can grow for $1, a messy corner that costs nothing, a dish of water. This is the knowledge that used to just pass from a grandmother to a granddaughter across a garden fence, free, the way it should. And somewhere along the way, it got replaced with a shelf full of bottles, because you cannot put a price tag on a dish of water and a handful of stones. There is no profit in telling a man his garden already came with everything it needs. An entire industry has been built, brick by brick, on making sure you never find that out. They do not need you to fail forever. They just need you to depend on them a little bit every single season. But I promised you a secret finale, and this last one is the piece that ties it all together. This is the one that even most experienced gardeners have never heard of, and it is the closest thing there is to the one single move that handles that 90% I told you about. It is old, it works, and the outside world only rediscovered it a few decades ago after forgetting it entirely. It is called a beetle bank. Let me tell you what a ground beetle is first, because these are the workers nobody ever credits. They come out at night when you are not watching, so you never see them earning their keep. A ground beetle is that fast, shiny, dark beetle you sometimes uncover under a board or a rock, and it scurries away. Most folks think it is a pest and step on it. That is one of the worst mistakes you can make in a garden. A ground beetle is a slug's nightmare. It hunts at night and eats slugs, slug eggs, cutworms, root maggots, cabbage worms, and the eggs and larvae of dozens of the pests that ruin your crops from below, and they are hungry. A single ground beetle can eat its own body weight in pests just about every night. Some kinds will eat their weight and more in slug eggs alone. These are the workers that handle all the trouble that happens down at the soil, the chewed seedlings, the cutworms that fell your tomato starts overnight, the slugs that shred your hostas and your lettuce, the stuff you wake up to and cannot figure out. So, where do these beetles live? Here is the key. They do not live out in the open bare soil of your beds. They cannot survive the winter there, and they cannot hide from the weather there. They need a dry, grassy, undisturbed place to shelter in and to get through the cold months. And in most modern gardens, there is no such place anywhere. Everything is mowed, tilled, cleaned, and bare. So the beetles that could be patrolling your rows every night have nowhere to make a home, and they never build up their numbers. The beetle bank fixes that, and it is nothing but a low ridge or strip of ground planted with bunching grass, left alone, never tilled, never sprayed. Just a raised line of tussocky native grass running through or alongside your garden. That grass forms a thick, dry, warm thatch at its base, and the ground beetles move in and treat it like a boarding house. From there, they fan out every single night into your beds to hunt, and they crawl back to the grass to shelter. Now, here is the number that ought to stop you in your tracks. When researchers over in England first developed and measured these strips of grass, and when Oregon State University brought the idea over here and studied it, They found that a good established beetle bank can hold something on the order of 1,000 or more predatory beetles and spiders packed into a single square yard of that grassy strip. 1,000 hunters living in a strip of grass you did not have to feed, water, or pay, all of them pouring out into your garden every night to eat the very pests you have been fighting by hand. That is the recovered knowledge right there. Because my grandfather never called it a beetle bank. He did not have the name for it. But there was always a grassy, weedy hedgerow bank running along the edge of our garden and between the fields, and it was never, ever tilled or burned or sprayed. And if you had asked him why, he would have said, "That is where the good ones live." He knew the effect. The English forgot it for 50 years and then paid scientists to rediscover what our old hedgerow banks were doing all along. Here is how you build one this weekend, and you can start small. You do not need machinery. Along one edge of your garden, or straight down the middle of a big plot, mound up a low ridge of soil, maybe a foot high and a couple feet wide, just a raised line. Plant it with a clumping, bunching grass. Native bunch grasses are best, the kind that grow in a tight tuft rather than spreading, because that tuft is what makes the warm, dry thatch the beetles want. Then here is the whole rule for the rest of its life. You leave it alone, you never till it, you never spray it. You let the dead grass build up at its base year after year, because that thatch is the whole point. That is the boarding house. If a whole ridge feels like too much to start, just do the smaller version I gave you earlier. Pick a strip along your fence, plant or let a clump of bunching grass grow, and stop touching it. Even that becomes a shelter. Even that gives your ground beetles and your spiders a place to survive the winter, so there is a standing army ready the moment your pests wake up in spring, instead of you waiting all season for help that never fully arrives. And that is the whole thing. That is how 90% of it disappears. Not by killing harder, by building a place where the killers already provided to you can live, eat, drink, and raise their young right there in your yard. Flowers for the flyers, a wild corner and a dish of water to keep them, and a strip of untouched grass for the night hunters down in the soil. Put those together and your garden stops being a battlefield you fight in every weekend and becomes something that mostly fights for itself, the way ours always have. I want you to think about what actually happened here. For years, maybe for decades, you have been sold the idea that your garden is a war and you need to keep buying ammunition. You were handed a spray bottle and a bill, season after season, for a job that $1 of seed and a saucer of water and a strip of grass were always going to do better. That was never your failure. It was just knowledge that got quietly taken out of your hands and put behind a price tag. My people simply never handed it over. We kept doing it the plain way while the world forgot, and now you have it back too. You are not the kind of person who wants to keep paying every year for what nature already gives away for free. If you were, you would not have made it this far with me. You are the kind who would rather understand a thing once and be done with it the way our grandparents did, than rent the same broken fix over and over. That is the whole spirit of the plain life, and it turns out it is just good sense. So, do this for me. Go back up to the comments and tell me your state or your growing zone, if you have not already, and tell me this too. Tell me which pest is your worst enemy. Is it aphids, or slugs, or those cabbage worms, or something else that keeps beating you? Write it down below. I read them, and I answer what I can, and the folks in these comments help each other more than you would believe. And if this gave you back something you did not know you had lost, come along with us. Subscribing here is not about helping some channel. It is about joining a group of people who are done overpaying for what the old ways already knew and who want to keep this plain, practical knowledge alive instead of letting it get buried again. Next time, I am going to show you the one thing my grandfather always dug into the bottom of every planting hole, a free handful of something most people throw straight in the trash, that fed his tomato plants all summer long without a single bag of fertilizer. It is sitting in your kitchen right now, and I will see you there. Before you go, let me share what waits inside the Amish field circle. This video gave the overview, but inside you get the full generations-old pest defense, plant by plant, picking up right where we left off. Ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself, never a machine. You belong among old ways growers gardening right alongside you. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen and cancel anytime, no risk. Now, wouldn't you love a simple spray that wipes out every pest but never harms your plants? That's exactly what I'll show you next, and it's starting right here. Stay with me and watch.